There is an old proverb that says, "The enemy of my enemy is my friend." Keep this in mind as we talk today about the deal between China and Iran. My name is Dr. David Oualaalou,
And my name is Dr. Ross Stewart.
and you are watching Geopolitics in Conflict. Today, we will be talking about the deal that Iran and China have struck, a 25-year-old deal that's going to include the economic and military components to it.
What we have is a geopolitical storm in the making.
It is indeed, Ross. It's because that's going to change the landscape on many fronts, politically, economically, and strategically as well.
Well, one of the things we know is that because of U.S. sanctions toward Iran, that there's going to be an exclusion of American or U.S. companies being able to benefit from this $400 billion investment.
And indeed, it is 400 billion. Let's give our viewers an idea of what this deal encompasses. So we'll talk about the economic side of the house first. The $400 billion included not just the investments of China in Iran, will include many industries, including
Well, technology for sure, as telecommunications and all the high-tech things surrounding that. It's certainly going to include banking.
the banking system.
It
yeah.
might include transportation.
And also there is the biotechnology.
And biotechnology as well.
Yeah. It's because China's demand for an energy from Iran will lead into that business transactions with Iran. Here is the deal that I see personally moving forward with this. The $400 billion is going to give China access to the Iranian markets. As you said, the industries you mentioned, the banking industry, the telecommunications, and of course with the introduction of the 5G, you can just see where it's going. But here is where I see the big concern moving forward for American companies, that they're not going to have a share of the pie per se. Why? Because those ventures in Iran is going to be led by Chinese companies.
We also know that with these sanctions in place, that whatever's left over, the Europeans are going to get.
Most likely the Germans, the French, the Italians, there is no doubt that the Europeans are going to move forward because they cannot miss out this opportunity.
And what the Chinese would say is Guangdong Henhao.
Which means,
This is really good.
well, it is indeed. It is indeed. But here is the interesting thing about this deal, Ross, just for our viewers, for them to have a better understanding of the big picture. There is also a military dimension to this. And that includes joint military exercises, the development and research of weapons, and here is the key component, is intelligence sharing.
Oh, the implications of this are wild.
You can only imagine the implications, not only in the Middle East, but on a global level, using the 5G technology into this. This is where the long-term strategy for the Chinese comes in. But also this, from a geopolitical perspective, is paving the way for China to increase its footsteps in the Middle East.
And we know that China is energy hungry, as we know from the Russian petroleum deal that was just struck. And so this has profound impact worldwide on energy.
That is correct.
Especially oil.
That is correct, Russ, and I'm glad you brought this up, because what's in it for China? Well, what's in it for China is they're going to be receiving oil from Iran at a heavy discounted price for the next 25 years. And as you and I know, the wealth is shifting from the west to the east. So that means China is going to become the next business mecca, if you will, for all the global economy to be transactioned through.
We've seen so much of that already with major universities in China bringing international students to their campuses for either a semester or a year. And we know that they've built entire cities around finance and economics. I've visited some of those. They're remarkable. It talks about real foresight on the Chinese Communist Party's hand to have these cities and universities cooperating worldwide with the financial world.
So apparently that the Chinese government, especially with, if we are to tie this to the global strategy for what they are thinking about, and all this traces its roots back to 2013 when President Xi Jinping initiated the BRI, the Belt Road Initiative. And if we look at the map, you're going to see why these investments in Iran makes more sense. Because if you look at the trajectory of where that road's going to go, it's going to go through Iran. So they are thinking long term. And this is not new, of course.
They've had 5-year plans and so on in China for decades and decades. So this is a 25-year deal. And the implications of that are they're going to stay the course. No matter who's in the White House, no matter who's in the United States government, they're all going to change.
That is correct, because their strategy has already been some sort of drafted throughout different parts of the world. And I'll give you a few examples. There are about 7 choke points in the world, from the Strait of Hormuz to the Strait of Malacca to the Bab el-Mandeb to the one in the Red Sea to the Panama Canal and all that. China has a presence in all this. You take, for example, Djibouti port.
Yeah.
China has a presence at that port. Well, why is that important? Because with the presence of China in Djibouti, but also China presence in the Gwadar port in Pakistan,
Yes.
and now the investments, the $400 billion in Iran, it gives China access to the Indian Ocean. And why is that important? Because 1/4 of the global transactions goes through those waters.
So what do you think this really means to American businesses, who so many are supplied by China?
Well, it's a big loss. It is a big loss, not only because of the sanctions imposed on U.S. on Iran rather, but also the restrictions placed on American firms not to do business with Iran, of course. But this also paved the way for European companies. And what we're going to be seeing next year and the next 2 years or so, we're going to see an increase in corporate earnings from the Europeans, not the Americans.
Maybe we should quote Mandarin again. Guangdong Henhao for the Europeans.
You're absolutely right.
That's what this deal really means. But it means there's a fantastic loss for American business.
Unless they figure out a way of how to partner with either entities in Europe or even with the Chinese.
And those things really aren't out of the question. I mean, we're going through a difficult time right now with some readjustments going on, and of course all the tragedies occurring in China. But we have seen over and over again, actually I've been a part of transactions of bringing French companies and American companies together. And we've seen any number of joint ventures with China.
Because that's where the market is. You cannot ignore a market of 1 billion consumers. And this is why we go back to this Iran-China deal. China thought about it in terms of not only to join forces with Iran economically inside Iran, but also China is thinking about one of the largest markets in the Middle East. Iran has about 85 million people. So you do not want to ignore a market like that. Plus, there is a lot of infrastructure needed to be built in Iran. So it's going to revamp the economy in Iran. But China also looking at this from a long-term perspective. It's a long-term goal.
You mean not quarter by quarter?
No, they don't. No, they don't. They tend to think long-term, as they say.
Yeah.
As they say in French. Il faut jamais regarder le bout du nez. Don't ever look at the end of your nose. You have to look very, very far, and that's what the Chinese are doing.
Exactly.
So it will be interesting to see how this will develop. But there is also another dimension to this deal, Ross, that we need to highlight for our viewers, for them to understand. And this component or this dimension is a strategic one. Why is that important? Our viewers might know this, that in Iran, India has invested heavily in developing Chabahar port. And why India did this? India did this one in return for cheap oil, of course. But in 2018, when the United States pulled out of the Iran nuclear deal unilaterally, the US threatened India to impose sanctions if they kept buying oil from Iran. So they stopped. And this is why now, with China investing $400 billion, they're going to have a say into what's going on in that port, which means India is the loser in this alliance between China and Iran.
Well, one of the things I suspect is that if China controls these waterways or has some major influence, that they're going to control which countries the flow of products are going to come from.
That's absolutely correct. The reason to that, Ross, is because they want to ensure access to energy. That is the whole reason also why China decided to go with Iran, but not Saudi Arabia or not Kuwait or not United Arab Emirates. Because Iran produces a lot of oil. China has already signed a deal with Russia for the next 30 years too. But China wants also to secure a second source of energy. Why? The estimations suggest that by 2030, which is less than a decade from now,
Yeah.
China is going to be consuming 16 million barrels a day to fuel its economy. Where that energy is going to come from? They decided, hey, we'll go with Russia. Russia is the second oil producers in the world. We'll go with Iran, one of the top oil producers in the world and a member of the OPEC.
I suspect it's going to profoundly influence the price of petroleum.
It will to a degree, but as I argued in my previous writing, don't expect the barrel of oil to go beyond $100, regardless what the speculators are saying. It ain't gonna happen. It will not happen because the demand has decreased with this pandemic.
Oh, yeah.
There are less planes flying. People are not traveling because of the lockdown. So the demand for oil has decreased substantially. However, for China, even for China, the demand has decreased, but China is not thinking about today or next 3 months or next year. They're thinking about the next 20 years. And that's why they wanted to secure a second source of access to energy. And Iran seems to be the perfect. And as we go back to that proverb, the enemy of my enemy is my friend, makes perfect sense. So the bottom line is that this deal is a deal of convenience that serves both countries, China and Iran.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I hope we provide some clear understanding as to what this deal entails and what's in it for the global economy in general. And hopefully in next discussions we will be talking about some other components pertaining to this in addition to other countries and how they're going to move economically moving forward for them.
And how it impacts the U.S. economy and small to medium-sized businesses as well.
It will be tremendous because what happens in the Middle East, what happens in China, what happens anywhere else outside the U.S. borders impact what's taking place internally. So thank you very much.